After 24th February, life was divided into before and after. I had beautiful plans for this year and unfortunately it so happened that everything was taken away from me.
We were traveling like kitten in a sack. That's it. No one told us anything. They said, don't tell anyone anything. Don't call to tell where you're going, how you're going, where you are. It's dangerous. That's it. Until we get you there, don't tell anyone anything.
On the 12th February, my father and his wife gathered the whole family to celebrate my birthday. Me, my children, my wife's children, neighbors. Somehow it hadn't happened for a long time. But this time he gathered the whole family. Yeah, we managed to do it. And sitting at the table, I had a flash of déjà vu. It had already happened in my life. It was in 2014 when these rallies began. And when I saw all of this just walking through the city, you feel that reality around you is changing. So, on the 12th, I had this. Sitting at the table, I felt it again. I had exactly the same feeling that the reality around me was changing for the second time. And I also had a feeling that this group will not gather at this table anymore. And unfortunately, I don't know if some of my relatives are alright.
The train was already full, but since people had already boarded, there was no crowd. Several soldiers lifted me up. It was catastrophic because there were very high steps, and the staircase was as high as a man, and it was impossible to lift me with a wheelchair. Therefore, they were just pulling me little by little. They almost broke my leg. But they lifted me up, after all. They asked one person who occupied the berth to sit down and put me next to them. My parents also sat down. Then they brought my wheelchair folded. The atmosphere was like in the movies about the Second World War, when you watch about echelons going nowhere, and you have exactly the same feeling when you are going and you don't know where you're going, whether you will be back, what is waiting for you there. You are going not knowing at all where you're going, just to get out.
The corridor, the vestibule, everything was packed with people. We were standing. They closed the doors, but even after that, we were standing, and the train did not depart. We were waiting at the Kiev station for about 3 hours. The train did not move. There was a siren, and no one knew anything. What to do, what to expect. We were just standing. Then they began to randomly place us in booths. Children were given one upper bunk for 2, and in the booth there were 12 of us, a big dog and 2 cats. I, of course, wasn't sitting in there inside. I was sitting in the corridor with our belongings. While we were traveling, they turned off the lights and asked us not to use phones so that there was no screen light. They asked us to be careful and sit away from the windows just in case. We stopped, stood, and waited for something. The train station in Lviv was a nightmare. There was a sea of people. It was scary. I realized it was a very smart decision not taking a suitcase because I was holding my children. I have a visual impairment, so anytime there are a lot of people, not holding my child's hands is very scary for me because I may lose sight of them. I'm also afraid that I'll miss some obstacles on the way or whatever. My son has a visual impairment too. He has a disability, so it is necessary to have constant physical contact, especially when there are a lot of people and you don't understand the situation, don't understand what may happen next. So it is good to hold on to each other all the time to be sure that everything is fine and we're together.
There were a lot of people on the train. Everyone was standing. Many children were standing. There were many animals, dogs and cats. And there was a woman standing with a boy of 2 or 3 years old, and he was crying so much. I couldn't resist and took him in my arms. And for the rest of the day, this boy was sitting on my lap. He was crying, then laughing, then sleeping, then crying, then laughing, then sleeping. Everyone was traveling like that. Everyone was silent. We were all traveling in silence. How else could we be feeling?
The scorching sun was just exhausting. The temperature reached 40.
We set up a tarp over the car.
We even took nets with us to shade us at least just a bit.
It was hard for Dima to sit in the car all the time. It was very hard for him.
But he is a patient guy.
The journey wasn't easy because we did not go on the highway, but drove around some other roads, other villages, and it lasted for a long, long time. We did not expect to be on the road for so long. We drove until night, and then at night we realized that we needed to spend the night somewhere because there were 3 adults, 2 children, a dog, a cat in the car. The driver needed to rest. On the way there was one kind of very nice moment. I don't remember at all where it was, what kind of area it was, or what day on the road it was, but there was a village where women treated travelers with hot food, soup, tea, and bread. It was very appropriate. It was very touching. It made me tear up. Emotionally, there was an expectation that tomorrow everything would end and we would return to Kiev.
As a person with an invisible disability, I look very suspicious. When I talk, when I react to sounds, when I in no way resemble a disabled person. And during all these border crossing events, I didn't use a hearing aid, which means I heard almost nothing. In the military commissary at the border during all this, I tried not to speak, to communicate only in writing, and not to show in any way that I could speak.
This trip was not easy from the very beginning, because at the border guard disliked me for some reason, and she sent me for filtration to the Russian Federal Security Service officers. I stood in line for 2.5 hours. No one cared that I had a disability. I just had to stand in line. There were only men with me. I was the only woman whom they disliked for some reason. Then I had a conversation with 2 federal security officers. It took about 20 to 30 minutes. They checked everything on my phone. They asked about contacts, groups, everything. Obviously, they asked about Ukraine. But then they found some contact related to LGBT and asked how I feel about LGBT and all that. Do I go to Pride? Do I communicate with my LGBT friends? They let me go. When it came out, I saw that my bus wasn't waiting for me. It just drove away. I was left alone in the field. Russian military vehicles were driving back and forth, and I was standing alone in the field. When we were driving in a convoy from Kryvyi Rih to Kherson, part of the roadside was mined. Twice it happened. The cars that were pulling over to the side of the road were blown up. You couldn't go to the toilet just behind a tree because it could be mined there. You had to do it right next to the car when there was a column of 500 cars.
We set off like this, 2 carts and 2 small bags that you could put on your knees. We couldn't take our things in our hands. We could only put them on the cart or on our knees. And that's why the bags were of such a size. The size of our knees. We also took several backpacks with documents, medical records, passports, diapers, catheters, urine bags, wet wipes, medicines, bandages, plasters, ointments, and antiseptics for wounds. And that's how we left. It was very scary. We didn't even know where we were going and what was going to happen.
It all looked like an unrealistic plan. I knew that my eyesight would not allow me to make such a maneuver. I did not yet know how much the rehabilitation had paid off. Still, I got to Bulgaria on my own. I rang the bell at my parents' door and they opened it, and there was a mute silence for like 5 to 10 seconds. My parents and my daughter were looking at me and couldn't believe that I had arrived. I saw no other option but to return to Ukraine to keep working for the foundation and delivering humanitarian aid.
The children went to the toilet, and I decided to wait for them to watch the bags. There were 25 minutes before the departure of our train to Bremen, and then I saw my daughter going back alone without my son. I froze in fear. I said, "Where is he?" And it turned out she lost him. I mean, it's not that she lost him, but he lost himself. He didn't wait for her. He went to wander somewhere around the station. I was terrified. I ran to the volunteers. I cried. I said, here's the situation. My child got lost. A child with autism. A volunteer took me to the police station, or whoever was sitting there. A person who keeps order at the railway station. And before we even got there, I turned around and I saw my son.
We left the hotel and there was a highway. A lot of ambulances, McDonald's, a gas station, and nothing else around. I was so afraid. Where have I come? Where have I come and why have I come so far? And then I felt how far I am from home and how much time will probably pass until I'm back. It was one of the hardest moments of realization that I really wanted to go far away, and when I arrived far away, I realized that the road home would be even longer. We asked the conductor and this man to help us lift the wheelchair. When we started lifting, the wheelchair got stuck between the raised platform and the train wheel. The conductor panicked. He started shouting that the train was about to leave and the wheelchair would be hanging on the platform. He started kicking the wheelchair with Anastasia from behind, and the wheelchair almost fell. This man caught Anastasia, and I quickly unfastened her in the dark. I don't know how I managed. And this man took Anastasia and went into the hallway. I started going upstairs after him and dragging the wheelchair behind me. At that moment, the conductor started shouting at me and telling me to leave the wheelchair and the suitcases on the platform. But I broke onto the train with the wheelchair. I assured him that I would fold it and put it somewhere because I can't do without it.